All right, welcome back. So today we're going to walk through emotionally focused therapy or EFT, and this is one of the most researched and effective approaches to working with couples and one that I personally use in my clinical work. So this is my favorite. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. All right, so just some opening questions that I want you to be thinking about, and maybe we'll have class and time in class to go over these. But usually Terry Wright usually takes the whole time. She's got a lot of great stuff to share, and she's amazing. So if we run out of time and she takes the whole time, totally fine because she's awesome. So anyway, as we begin, I want you to reflect for a moment. Have you ever worked with a couple? Some of you have, some of you in Cope. If not, are you curious about it? And what do you think might be the most difficult part? And what might be the most rewarding part? So just take a moment to consider your initial reactions. I know I thought I would never work with couples. I thought it would be too much, too many people in the room. I thought I might get triggered by, high conflict in the room. But if you've got a model to fall back on, you really don't have to worry too much about that. I mean, certainly sometimes it's difficult, um, but it's much more difficult if you don't have a model to fall back on, if you don't have a roadmap, right? So just think about those things. Okay. And so, did you know it's not just for couples? So, before we really dive into it, it's important to know that EFT is not just for couples. It was originally created for couples, but there's also emotionally focused individual therapy or EFIT and emotionally focused family therapy, EFFT. So today, however, we're going to focus specifically on emotional focused couples therapy or EFCT. All right, so our goals today are threefold. First, I want to provide you with an overview of EFT and its theoretical foundations. Second, I want to help you understand the process and the techniques of how we actually do EFT. And third, I want to introduce you to the training and certification pathways. And you can get trained without having to do all the expensive certifications. I think that's actually the route I may be going, because it's a really great training. It's a three-part training. We can talk more about that at the end. But that's what we're going to be doing today. So first, the theoretical overview of EFT. All right, so first and foremost, the founders. So when we talk about EFT, we really have to start with Sue Johnson because her work fundamentally shaped how we understand love and relationships in clinical practice. So Sue Johnson was a British clinical psychologist, and she later worked in Canada, and she's widely considered the primary developer and driving force behind EFT. And so she initially collaborated with this old guy over here, pictured Les Greenberg, in the early development. They were colleagues and worked on this, but Johnson went on to refine and research and expand and really flesh out the whole model into what we now know as emotionally focused couples therapy or EFT, all of the emotionally focused therapy. So, what makes her contribution so significant is that she took attachment theory, which we've been working on, through this attachment book. That's why I kind of I preloaded you with um, uh, the attachment material. So, anyway, she took attachment theory, which originally focused on infants and caregivers, as you know, like that strange situation experiment, and she applied all that to adult romantic relationships. And so that was a major shift in the field. And so she conducted extensive research showing that EFT is highly effective with strong outcomes for distressed couples, which is one reason it's considered an evidence-based model because she has so much research behind it, right? Sadly, she died in April of 2024, right when I was getting started on this. And so that was a big loss to the EFT community. Um, but anyway, in addition to her research and clinical work, she's also a powerful communicator. If you watch any videos of her, it's pretty impressive. Her book, Hold Me Tight, it's a self-help book for couples, and we recommend it to all our couples that we work with. But Hold Me Tight brought EFT concepts to the general public. So it helps couples understand their own negative cycles and emotional needs in a very accessible way. And so she also founded the International Center for Excellence in Emotionally Focused Therapy. It's called ICEFT, which oversees training and certifications for therapists all around the world. So, what exactly is EFT? It's based on attachment theory and it integrates experiential and systemic approaches. So, at its core, it's helped us to understand that humans are wired for connection and distress happens when that connection is threatened. So it's an evidence-based model. It's one of the most, important ethical responsibilities that we have as counselors is to choose an evidence-based model. And so that means we're not just relying on intuition or what feels right, what our gut tells us. We're using approaches that have strong research support. And so this is one of the reasons EFT is so powerful. So with EFT, we move out of the really overwhelming space where couples can feel chaotic or confusing and into something much more grounded and structured. EFT helps us to understand that what's happening in the room is understandable, that there's a reason each partner is reacting the way they are. It's predictable, so we can actually anticipate patterns once we see the cycle. It's explainable. We have language and theory to make sense of it all. And it's changeable. Most importantly, it's changeable. We know how to intervene. So instead of feeling stuck or reactive as a therapist, we actually have a clear framework. And I love this next part because it really captures EFT. We know the territory, right? Which is the couple's problem. It's usually the negative cycle. So that gives us the territory. Where are we? The landscape. We know the destination where we're trying to go, which is a secure attachment and emotional connection. And then we have the map. It's got specific steps, moves, and key moments that guide change. So EFT really takes something that can feel messy and emotional, and it turns it into something that we can navigate with confidence and intention. So that's what makes it just not just effective, but just ethical. That's why it's ethical, because there's so much evidence behind it, right? So the theoretical lenses, it draws from three major theories: attachment theory, experiential slash humanistic therapy. If you remember Fritz Perls, Carl Rogers, and then systemic therapy, which you've been learning the first 5 weeks in this class. We learned all of the classic systemic therapies, theories. So these work together to help us understand both internal emotional experiences and relational patterns. So first, we'll talk about attachment. And this is mainly what we'll be talking about. But attachment theory tells us that the relationship distress is really about emotional disconnection. So when we feel like our partner isn't accessible or responsive or engaged, then that's when the distress emerges. So negative behavior and emotion is understood, reframed, and validated as a predictable response to separation distress. So when someone's kind of acting like a jerk, it's really because they're feeling disconnected and they don't want to be feeling disconnected. For the most part. I mean, sometimes a jerk is a jerk, right? But this is how we frame this. All right. So, are you there for me? Is kind of what the question is, that's being asked here. So, a core EFT concept is these three little parts. So, the A is for accessible. When I know that you're there for me, right? I know that you're around, you're there for me. And responsive is when I reach for you, I know you will respond to me. And then emotionally engaged is you will engage emotionally with me in an attuned way, attuned, right? So when you're mirroring people. So like just the other day I was listening to a friend who was going through a hard time, and he was kind of ranting and raving and loud, and I started ranting and raving with him, and I got loud and I was like, yeah, and then this, and then can you believe that? And so after a few minutes of this, he kind of really de-escalated and calmed down. And he said, "Thank you. Thank you for yelling with me and ranting with me, because most people just want to tell you to relax. And that's just not helpful." And I'm like, oh, yeah, and I didn't even intentionally do that. That was not therapy. That was just me talking to a friend. But it just reminded me so much of being attuned to someone. When someone's angry, until you validate that anger and you get up there with them and validate it, they're not going to be able to de-escalate, because they're going to try to continue to make you understand how they're feeling. If they don't feel understood, they're going to get stuck. If you hear people repeat themselves in kind of different ways, that means they don't feel understood, and you need to circle back to whatever it is that they keep repeating, right? So that's good to remember. But are accessible, responsive, and emotionally engaged. Okay, so attachment dynamics are the primary predictor of healthy adjustment. So what this means is living in a sense of connection with multiple relationships that have those elements, accessible, responsive, and engaged. That's going to be predictive of healthy adjustment. You're going to feel good. You're going to have good mental health if you have some significant relationships that have those elements, ARE. So take a moment to reflect. Who are your R people? Who shows up for you? And where might there be relationships that are missing this sense of connection? You're not sure if someone's going to be there for you. You're not sure if they're going to respond if you reach for them. You're not sure how they're going to respond. Are they going to be attuned to you or are they going to gaslight you about your feelings? Are they going to invalidate your feelings, right? So where are people missing the mark? How can those relationships might need to be improved? You might have relationships that feel off and you're not really sure why. And think about, are some of these elements maybe missing? So, all right. So next, the second is experiential slash humanistic lens. It comes from some of those traditional theories that you learned in your theories class. So it draws heavily from thinkers like Carl Rogers and Fritz Perls, of course. And so this is where EFT really shifts into how we see clients. EFT is a depathologizing model, which means we are not looking at people as broken, disordered, or deficient. We're looking at them as human beings who are trying their best, often unsuccessfully, but they are trying to meet very real, very healthy emotional needs. And at the core of this perspective is the belief that people are naturally oriented towards growth. They want connection, they want safety and meaning, and their emotional responses make sense in that context. So that's what you have to keep into perspective. So when couples come in and they say they're stuck in conflict, EFT helps us reframe what's happening. So instead of asking what's wrong with them, what's wrong with that person, what's wrong with that, couple, we ask what's happening inside of them and what are they needing right now. And this is where it's really important, to remember that people are stuck. They're not sick. And couples aren't dysfunctional in the way that we might traditionally think. They're caught in patterns that no longer work, old patterns. All right. And so the goal of therapy is not to fix them, but it's to help them have new emotional experiences. So, what we call corrective experiences, and that actually reshapes how they connect with each other. So, this lens keeps us grounded in empathy and curiosity, and of course, deep respect for the client's humanity. So that's the pieces we pull from experiential and the humanistic pieces. And remember, Virginia Satir was experiential. So remember her, right? And I know I referenced EFT during that experiential lecture too. So anyway, moving right along to the systemic piece of it, that the whole what this whole class has been about up to this point. So as therapists, we track interactional patterns. We help couples see that the cycle they're caught in. We help them to see that rather than blame each other. And the goal is to create more flexibility and positivity within that relationship. All right, now there's this concept called primal panic. And so it's when connection is threatened, the brain interprets it as danger. It really feels like life and death because remember, back in caveman days, it was life and death to be separated from your herd, to be separated from your primary attachments who were looking out for you, had your back, were keeping you safe, and you were doing that for them as well. So our brains still interpret that as danger, and this is called primal panic. That's why it's primal, because it's in our brain stem, it's in our lizard brain. And it explains why relationship conflict can feel so intense and so urgent. And we are only as needy as our unmet needs, says John Bowlby. So if somebody ever calls you needy, it's because maybe they're not able to meet your needs. And you go find somebody who is meeting your needs, or they need to be open to learning how to meet your needs, and vice versa, right? Only as needy as our unmet needs. All right, so we're going to talk about the attachment system. And this is important. If you've kind of tuned out and you're busy and you're distracted, tune back in here because this really funnels into making sense of EFT and how we use it. All right, so it's the most important piece. All right, the attachment system. This concept comes from John Bowlby, and it helps us understand our need for connection, that it's not just emotional, that it's biological. The attachment system is essentially our built-in survival system, and its job is to protect us from danger by keeping us close to people who feel safe and supportive, what we call attachment figures. So our parents is who we start with, and then it becomes our friends, maybe our roommates, and eventually maybe romantic partners. Um, and it could even be God. It could be whoever your spiritual higher power being is. But those are our attachment figures. And this doesn't just apply to children, right? Again, in adulthood, our romantic partners often become our primary attachment figures. So now an attachment figure serves three key roles. Three key roles. First, they are the target for proximity seeking, meaning that when something feels wrong, we naturally move towards them. We're looking for that person to move towards. We want a hug from them. We want to be near them. We want to sit by them, hold their hand. Second, they function as a safe haven, someone we turn to for comfort, reassurance, and support when we're distressed. We're going to tell them about our problems, about our pain, about our hurt, so we can get comfort from them. They're our safe haven. And third, they provide a secure base, which means that when we feel safe in the relationship, we're actually more able and confident to go out in the world and take risk and pursue our goals. So they're our secure base because we know we've got somebody to come back to. So it's a paradox, right? Strong dependence in relationships actually supports independence. And this is really important clinically because when we see conflict in couples, EFT helps us to understand that what's often underneath is a disruption in this system. Someone is no longer experiencing their partner as a safe haven or a secure base. So instead of seeing conflict as a dysfunction, we begin to see it as a signal that the attachment system is activated and a need for connection is not being met. Okay, so that's what's happening here in a dysfunctional, it helps you to really conceptualize what's going on with the clients. So just to reiterate visually, a safe haven is your source of protection, comfort, support, and relief in times of need. And your secure base is your base camp. Remember, like, think about what the purpose of a base camp is. It's got all your supplies, your shelter, it's where you rest, it's where you build energy to go back out and explore. So, in a relationship, a secure base encourages the individual to pursue their goals in a safe relational context. Secure base. All right, so now we're going to talk about attachment security and the primary strategy that we most often use. I mean, it's really the goal of the entire attachment system. So let me just pull it all up here, actually. All right, so when the system gets activated by some kind of trigger, and this could be anything from signals of disconnection or danger in the relationship. It might be something small, like a partner not responding to a text, or something bigger, like a conflict, criticism, or feeling rejected. So once that trigger happens, the body sends a signal, and that signal shows up as emotion. That's why this is emotion-focused therapy, because it's that signal saying, "Uh-oh, danger is here, present." So feelings like fear, hurt, sadness, and even anger are not random. They are usually signals that the attachment system has been activated. So from there, we moved into our primary attachment strategy, which is to reach for connection, to seek closeness and reassurance or support from our partner. Now, if that bid for connection is successful, if the partner responds in a way that feels safe and attuned, something really important happens. The system de-escalates, and the person experiences a felt sense of security, and they return to a calm, emotionally regulated state. That's what we call co-regulation. Parents do it with their children, partners do it with each other. So, attachment security is not just a concept, it's an actual felt experience in the body. And when people feel secure, they don't have to keep protesting or withdrawing. They can relax, regulate, and shift their attention back to everyday life. But clinically, what we often see is what happens when that process doesn't work. And that's when couples get stuck in those negative cycles that we've been talking about. So here's just kind of a visual of a primary attachment strategy. You're in an emotionally regulated state. You're just bebopping along through life here at the top. I'm going to start at the top and go down to the right. So then you have a sense of disconnection from your attachment figure. Maybe it's the unresponded to text, or maybe it's the fight, maybe it's the criticism, maybe it's a sense of, oh, they're kind of pulling away. Whatever it is, you get a sense of disconnection from your primary attachment figure, and it cues danger. And then you have emotions. You have a sense of fear, sadness, hurt, anger, loneliness, whatever. So your primary attachment strategy is to seek the proximity and support from your attachment figure. You say, "Hey, are we okay? Is everything okay?" You try to repair, you try to reconnect. If the partner leans in, is accessible, responsive, and emotionally attuned, they're able to comfort you, they're able to hear you, validate you, comfort you. Yes, I love you. Just because we fight, doesn't mean I don't love you. I want to be with you, right? Whatever it is, the partner is able to comfort. And then not only that is the partner able to comfort, the partner that was sensing the danger is able to feel the comfort, is able to accept and trust that comfort. So then there's a felt sense of security and the danger cue is de-escalated. And then we go back to an emotionally regulated state. And that's when things are working well. That's when relationships are healthy and things are going well. That's your primary attachment strategy. Now, this is when things get sideways, and this is how we conceptualize that. Okay. So, the secondary strategies is when connection bids fail, people shift into these secondary strategies. So now we're looking at what happens when attachment needs are not met. So if that primary strategy, reaching for connection, doesn't work, the system doesn't just shut off. You don't just get over it. Instead, people shift into what we call secondary attachment strategies. And in EFT, we organize these into two main patterns: hyperactivation and deactivation, or hypoactivation, right? Hyper and deactivation. So let's start with hyperactivation. This is what we typically think of as the pursuer. This person is in kind of a fight response. They protest, they escalate, they push for connection. But here's the important reframe. They're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to get their partner. They're not trying to be difficult and a jerk, right? They're just trying to get their partner to respond to them. Their core fear is that my partner isn't there for me. So they turn up the volume. They might criticize, demand, cling. You always go off with your friends. You never pay attention to me. You need, if you really love me, you would stay here and pay attention to me and spend time with me. And they cling and they try to control the interaction, and you know, all the things, because their main goal is to get a response so that they feel seen, prioritized, and safe. And so now on the other side, we have deactivation. And this is what we often call the withdrawer. This is what we see with the withdrawer. So instead of moving towards connection, this person moves away. They shut down, they avoid or detach. But again, this is not because they don't care, which how that's how the pursuer will interpret it, but it's not because they don't care. It's because connection feels unsafe or overwhelming. So their strategy is, if I don't reach, I can't be hurt. So they suppress their needs. They avoid emotional intensity. They rely on themselves. They create distance emotionally or even physically. And their main goal is to turn down the attachment system so that they don't feel the pain of disconnection. And so here's the key takeaway. These two strategies trigger each other, of course, and it's sort of that avoidant, anxious avoidant trap that the book that we've been reading talks about. And the more one partner pursues, the more the other withdraws. And the more one withdraws, the more the other escalates. So what we're seeing is not just dysfunction, it's a pattern of protection. So both partners are trying to stay safe and they're both missing each other. So, right, like the pursuer thinks, if we don't talk about this right now, oh my gosh, this relationship is going to fall apart and explode. And the withdrawer thinks, oh my gosh, if we keep on talking about this, this relationship is going to fall apart and explode, right? So they're both in a weird, twisted way, both trying to protect that relationship by these secondary strategies because their primary strategies have stopped working, right? So now they're kind of into this other stuff, hyperactivation, deactivation. Okay. So that moves us into protective strategies. That kind of explains it. But these strategies combine into patterns: pursue and withdraw. Both are attempts to maintain connection, even if they look different. Hyperactivation involves pursuing, protesting, demanding, escalating in an effort to get connection. Deactivation involves withdrawing, shutting down, avoiding, and suppressing needs to protect self. And so withdrawing might even also look like, it's not just like stonewalling and getting quiet and leaving. It could be like cracking jokes or changing the subject or just trying to be like a little class clown. Like, we talked about those communication stances. They might be that comedian, right? To try to withdraw from the emotion, from the connection, from the being pursued, trying to. So sometimes withdrawal doesn't always look like what you might think it does. Anyway. So here's just a visual of the negative cycle, and we'll talk more about this when we get into techniques, but this leads to the negative cycle when one partner pursues, you see it, it triggers it triggers some primary emotions. Maybe they feel rejected, inadequate, shame, overwhelmed, all those things right there. And it can go up into secondary emotions that often turn into anger. Most of the time, what I see is anger or just stonewalling. Um, the behaviors are the protective moves. They shut down, right? That stonewalling, that anger, rage, frustration, jealous, anxiety turns into, well, let me just shut down, be quiet, distance, become defensive, or crack a joke. We got to keep that in there. And then that goes in and that feeds in and triggers the pursuer. And they might feel hurt, alone, unwanted, isolated, abandoned, right? If you're like pursuing someone and they crack a joke in your face, you're going to feel dismissed, right? And that's going to lead into those secondary emotions, which might be anger, rage, frustration, jealousy, all the things. And then you're going to crank up the heat. The pursuer, you might be more critical, more hostile, aggressive, be attacking. And then the cycle's just going to go on and on. And I have a video that explains this a little bit more eloquently with a little cartoon, and we'll watch that together. But this is just a visual of that pursue withdraw dynamic that we're trying to, work with and change. All right, so goal two is our process and our techniques. So the first thing we're going to look at is this metaphor of little Jimmy on the playground. So think of a child on a playground who falls and looks for comfort. Adults do the same thing, just in more complex ways. But if you're, think if you're the mom sitting on the bench reading a book, and little Jimmy or June or whoever is playing, and they fall down and they really hurt themselves. They hurt their knee, they sprain their ankle, whatever. What is a child going to do? Does a child need communication classes? Does a child need to think about it? It's a natural reaction. The child is naturally going to cry out for its mom. It's going to cry. It's going to send an emotional signal. Mom, I need you. I need your comfort. I need your help. Does the mom need communication classes? Does the mom need to think it through and figure out, how do I need to respond? No, the mom naturally knows to run over to their child and wrap them up in their arms. Are you okay? What happened? Show me what hurts. Oh my gosh. You know, that's a natural signal and response. And then adults, they just overcomplicate it in romantic relationships. Someone is sending a clear emotional signal. Um, we would hope that our partner would naturally want to move towards them and comfort that. And so that's what we're trying to move towards. And so just think of it as, sometimes you're the mama and sometimes you're the baby in this metaphor, right? In the relationship. Sometimes you're the one sending the need for help, and sometimes you're the one providing the comfort. So hopefully that makes sense. That made sense to me in the training. That was really powerful to me. All right, and so a therapist role as an EFT therapist, you are a temporary attachment figure. You create safety, you model empathy, and you guide partners towards new emotional experiences by helping them send and receive clear emotional signals. So empathic responsiveness, and I put this baby here looking in the mirror, right? We talked about mirroring whatever emotions they're bringing. You've got to validate that. Mirroring is a big part of that. But overall empathic responsiveness, it's just one of the most important parts of EFT. In EFT, a therapist's presence is not neutral or distant. You're not a blank space, it's blank slate. It's actually very active, engaged, and deeply attuned. So because your empathy, how you respond to each partner, creates safety in the room. And that safety is everything. So if clients don't feel safe, they won't risk sharing the deeper emotions that are driving the cycle. So in many ways, you are the starting point. And there's a lot of talk about use of self as therapist in EFT. So here's the goal. We're not just being empathic for the sake of it, just because you're supposed to be as a counselor. We are actually modeling a new way of responding. So we want partners to begin responding to each other the way we are responding to them. So when you slow things down, reflect emotion, validate experience, get curious about, the person, you're actually teaching them how to do that with each other. And I've even explicitly said this in session before. I've sat there and I validated one of the partners, and they said, "Oh my gosh, that just feels so good to be validated, and that just like makes me feel so much better, just even you validating that." And I said, "Yes, and isn't that amazing how something so small, and you can do that with each other. You can do that with each other. You can get curious about each other, your partner, and have those, you can slow this down and get curious and try to really understand each other, just like I did for you." I'll say it explicitly sometimes because sometimes they're just not catching on. So you're modeling secure attachment in real time. This is why we say that the EFT therapist is kind of a surrogate attachment figure. So you step up into their emotional world, you track their experience, and you respond in a way that is accessible, responsive, and emotionally engaged, ARE, just like we talked about in the beginning. And one of the most powerful tools you bring into the room is curiosity. It's not judgment, it's not fixing, it's not taking sides, it's not advice. It's genuine curiosity. So you're saying things like, help me understand what happens for you right there when your partner just looked at you that way or said that, or, well, help me understand what happens for you. Or what did you feel in that moment? And over time, the couple begins to shift from reacting to each other to become curious about each other. And that shift is where change really begins. And I've had severe withdrawals. I ask them, what comes up for you? When as your partner's saying that to you, what comes up for you? They'll say, I don't know what you mean by what comes up for me. I don't understand what you're asking me. Okay, I'm like, what thoughts and feelings are you having when your partner just said XYZ to you? Like, so I've got to the point where I ask that person, what do you think about that? Because they're very cognitive. They don't understand, like, what comes up for you? That what are you feeling? Like, they cannot even understand what that question means. And it's really sad. But they tend to respond to, what do you think about that? And then we can kind of get into that, and I can kind of get them to in some more emotional language. Anyway, so that's empathic responsiveness. We hovered there a long time because it's so important. All right, so assessment. Assessment happens over multiple sessions. You gather history, identify attachment patterns, and most importantly, you map the negative cycle. All right, so in the first session, we're shifting into what actually this looks like in practice, right? The first session of EFT, I want you to notice something right away. We're not just asking questions to gather information, we're asking questions to begin mapping the attachment system and the negative cycle. So we start with the left side, what we ask, and the right side is why we ask it. So we begin with what brings you in today? What are your hopes for therapy? This helps us to understand not just the problem, but the motivation and the investment in the process. Then we move into, how do you make sense of your difficulties? This is really important because we're starting to hear how each partner frames the problem, who or what they see as responsible. And the next we ask, help me understand where you get stuck. What does a typical argument look like? And this is where we begin to identify the negative interactional cycle. Okay, so we're listening for, who pursues, who withdraws, what triggers the pattern, how it escalates. And I promise you, whoever the first one is to say something is the pursuer if you're trying to figure it out. And they're usually going to say, well, I want to know what you think. They're going to try to put the ball in the withdrawers court because they feel so like exhausted from pursuing. So that's going to be your first, indicator here when you're trying to conceptualize your clients. So we also ask about, well, when they feel emotionally connected, close, and responsive, because EFT is not just about problems. We're also identifying existing strengths and moments of secure attachment. And finally, have there been difficult moments in the relationship? And this is where we're assessing for attachment injuries, those deeper wounds that may still be shaping the relationship, maybe things we really haven't gotten over. Um, they might have kids that are teenagers and the wife still felt like, and sometimes it's outside of the person's control, but the example that was used in the training that I wouldn't have ever thought about was a wife had a baby by herself in the hospital. Her husband wasn't able to be there because he was deployed. And that was really painful for her because, in those big moments, you want your primary attachment figure. And it was through no fault of his own. But it's just kind of how it happened. And so they had to work through that. So, you might have things that are several years old that are still shaping the relationship. And that's why we ask that for attachment injuries. Okay. So then assessment and alliance. So now we're looking at how EFT structures the assessment phase and builds the therapeutic alliance. And one thing I want to emphasize right away, there is a structure, but we also have to stay flexible depending on the couple. So typically EFT follows a sequence like this. We start with one conjoint session. We're both partners in the room together. Then we moved into individual sessions with each partner. Each partner gets their whole hour, and it could go longer than an hour sometimes. If you've got an hour and a half, go ahead and block that off for especially the individual sessions. And then we come back together for another conjoint session. So session length can vary, usually somewhere between an hour to an hour and a half, but again, flexibility is key. So now these individual sessions are really important, and sometimes students underestimate their value. The goal is not to split the couple or take sides. We're using this time to deepen the alliance with each partner individually. That's when you can really dig and be like, oh my gosh, did he really do that? I can't believe you had to go through that. You really are being able to validate, how that partner is feeling in the privacy of that individual session. So you're gathering really important information. You're exploring each person's attachment history, how they learn to connect, trust, and respond in relationship. Um, we're assessing for safety, of course, including any concerns about emotional or physical harm. That's when you're gonna, because abuse is a contraindicator to EFT. So if there's ongoing abuse, if we cannot create a felt sense of safety in the room, you cannot get any work done. So then at that point, you would come up with something and you would say, this isn't a good fit or it's not going to work with my schedule. And then you help the person being abused get the resources that they need. So you need those individual sessions to assess for safety. And then we're identifying potential attachment injuries, right? Like I mentioned earlier, those key moments where they may have that trust may have been broken or they may have felt alone in a big moment. And so we're also checking for things like mental health concerns or substance use, which may impact the work because especially substance use, it's almost like an affair. If there's an ongoing affair, that's also a contraindicator. You can't continue therapy that way because there's a competing attachment. And it's the same with substance abuse. If there's an ongoing addiction, that alcohol or whatever the drug of choice is, that's going to be a competing attachment. And it's hard to get work done when there's competing attachments in the mix. So, and importantly, this is where we establish a clear no secrets policy because in EFT, we're working towards openness and transparency in the relationship, and we don't hold secrets that could undermine the therapy process. So if you make that really clear that this everything in here is confidential, confidentiality between you as a couple and me as the therapist, but my client is your relationship. It's not you or you, it's the relationship. And so anything that's disclosed to me, we're going to have to find a way to bring it out into the open because that's what we're working towards is that transparency and safety to be fully who you are and so you just have to be clear because you don't want them to reveal things to you and just like, oh, okay, you are having an affair and your partner doesn't know it. We actually need to disclose that. Oh, okay. Didn't know that, right? Panic. All right. So anyway, overall, this phase is it's more than just gathering information. It's about building trust, safety, and a strong alliance with both partners. And so that when we move into deeper emotional work, the foundation is already in place. Okay, so this slide gives you a snapshot of how we assess attachment in individual sessions. And these are just example questions. It's a starting point to guide your curiosity. In practice, I use a much more detailed assessment of at Right Counseling Group, which I posted on Blackboard. You have access to that. But at a high level, we're doing three main things. First, we're exploring early attachment experiences. Who did you go to? Were they available? How did you seek comfort? What did that look like as a child? And then second, we're looking at the model of relationships they learned growing up. What did connection look like in their family? Were their parents affectionate? How was conflict handled? Did they ever see their parents experience conflict and resolve that? Was that ever modeled for them? A lot of times kids say, "No, my parents never fought." I mean, you never saw them fight, which is kind of a disservice to the child because they never get to see how conflict is resolved in a healthy way. And so that shows up in a weird way too. And so, how did you seek, or was there warmth, repair, distance, or unpredictability? So, what was that like? What was the vibe in the household growing up? Because that informs your attachment. And then what we know, attachment is ever evolving and malleable. We're looking for how previous romantic attachment relationships may be influencing the couple's current relationship as well. Because remember, it's ever evolving. Adult attachment is ever evolving based on lived experiences. So again, these are example questions, not a script that you have to follow exactly. And you can look at what I use on Blackboard. But in practice, we're exploring how clients have experienced comfort and connection in romantic relationships, whether they have been, in patterns of unavailability, betrayal, or inconsistency, and any attachment injuries or traumatic experiences that may still be impacting them. Maybe they got cheated on and they just really cannot trust now. Maybe they just really have a hard time trusting. That didn't happen in childhood, believe. That happened in at least adolescence. So we're also paying attention to how they seek comfort, what they've learned about vulnerability and trust, and most importantly, what they do when comfort isn't available. All right, so that is assessment. All right, and now we're looking at the negative cycle. Um, it's a signal interference. So you've got the pursuer and withdrawer stances, and it's the first thing we need to help the couple organize and understand. You're very explicit with the couple about the negative cycle. They should get so sick of you talking about the negative cycle, and they will. And they'll want to say, well, our problems are more complex than the cycle. That doesn't really apply to us. Okay. Okay. And then you just work the stuff into the cycle anyway, because it all is a cycle. I mean, you have to validate how they feel. You can't argue with them about it, but you can tie it right back into the cycle. And it externalizes the problem too. Now it's not me against you, it's us against this negative cycle. It's us against this negative pattern. So, really utilizing the negative cycle as a tool. It's not just a conceptualization tool, it's also a therapeutic tool. And you're on the same team with your couple, helping them figure that pattern out and break it, change it. And again, here's the visual of that. There's several visuals. This is a very simplified version. It's not my favorite one, but I do like that there's this dotted line that goes through the middle, because you can see the dotted line we call the line of vulnerability. So usually underneath that, you've got your primary emotions, which are more raw, vulnerable emotions. Um, you've also got your unmet attachment needs. And so why are we feeling alone? Why are we feeling unwanted? It's because we need to feel seen. We need to feel valued. We need to feel important to our significant other. So it's unmet attachment needs. And that's what our partner doesn't see usually when we've got especially high conflict couples. They're not seeing these more softer, the underbelly of the more negative stuff here at the top. So if you look on top of the line of vulnerability, you see anger, rage, frustration, jealousy, anxiety, resentment, more of these petty, uncomfortable, but empowering emotions. Anger is a very empowering emotion because it empowers you to something is not right and something needs to change, right? It empowers you to create change. And then the behaviors. This is what we do see. We usually see the secondary emotions and the behaviors. Critical, hostile, aggressive on the pursuer side, shut down, silence, distance on the withdrawer side. And so what we're trying to do is get our partners to communicate below that line of vulnerability, because without vulnerability, there is no connection. You have to be willing to be vulnerable with each other to be connected. And so that's why we're trying to get them to go deeper. So there's your visual on the negative cycle. All right, so here's a video. It's about 5 minutes. It explains it. I know we're not going to have time to watch it in class, so I'm just going to go ahead and play it here, and it's going to make this little lecture a little bit longer, but we're going to do it anyway.
A feeling of distance, disconnect, and conflict are not what anyone signs up for in a relationship. When we first fall in love, it's hard to imagine that it would be possible to drift apart, but somehow you found yourself there. Perhaps you're silently trying to figure out what's wrong. Maybe you guys talk round and round and round and you get nowhere. Either way, you found yourself in a conflict cycle and you are at a loss of how to get out of it and back to the good feelings you love. The good news is that there is a process that is proven to stop this cycle and restore the feelings of love and connection. This process will identify what pushes you guys apart and help you understand how to reconnect. With this process, you can find your way back to each other and you can experience a strong and secure relationship. Let's take a closer look at this conflict cycle. This cycle is the true enemy of your relationship, but it's tricky and makes you think that the enemy is your partner. We all have different conflict cycles, but I will show you briefly what this could look like with a quick example. In our example, we have a couple who desperately wants to love each other, but they are stuck inside the fight cycle. We will call them Patrick and Amanda. Today, Patrick is on his way home from work, looking forward to spending time with Amanda. Unfortunately, he's late. Now, Amanda really wants to feel important to Patrick. She loves Patrick, and this relationship is so important to her. And when Patrick arrives late, Amanda feels invisible, helpless, and even alone. The desire to feel important is Amanda's attachment longing. And these feelings are what drives her next actions. Because telling Patrick about these feelings is scary. Amanda fears that Patrick will tell her that she really isn't important to him. Now, this is interesting because Patrick wants nothing more for Amanda to know how important she is, how much he loves her. But Amanda doesn't see this and begins to get angry. She's feeling unimportant. She thinks Patrick is being so self centered and that he doesn't care about her. What Amanda does is she tries to explain herself to Patrick. She tries to get Patrick to see what he's done wrong. She reacts by getting angry. She demands answers and even criticizes Patrick. You're never home on time. Why were you late? You're so selfish, she tells him. Patrick loves Amanda and doesn't want to fight with her. Patrick just wants to feel accepted for who he is. He wants to feel safe. This is Patrick's attachment longing. Even though Amanda really loves Patrick with all her heart, when Amanda yells at him, he feels rejected by her. He worries that he won't ever be enough for her. He feels like he's failed her. No one ever taught Patrick how to express these feelings. He just knows it feels pretty gross and scary to face. He also cannot tell Amanda about these feelings. It's scary for Patrick to face these feelings, so he covers them up with resentment. What Patrick thinks is that he's a total disappointment to Amanda and that she is critical and unhappy with him. So what Patrick does is withdraw. Patrick feels like if there was just a bit of space, he could let things calm down and forget about it. He leaves to go check the news. Now Amanda is left alone, still wanting to feel important and loved by Patrick, but he just walked away when she was trying to explain how hurt she was. This re-triggers her need to feel important. She gets angrier. She follows him up the stairs. How could you walk away? She demands. Don't you even care? What kind of husband are you? And back we go to Patrick, who now feels like a bad husband. He already walked away and now he's stuck, but he refuses to meet her eyes or answer her questions in the hope that this will prevent the fight from getting any bigger. He just wants things to get back to normal. And on the cycle goes, growing bigger and bigger, pushing Patrick and Amanda further and further apart until they feel completely disconnected, more like roommates stuck inside the home they created together. When we can slow this process down outside of an argument, this calms our brains down and allows us to begin to better communicate with our partners. Real life will be a little bit more complicated than this example, but you can probably see a bit of yourself in either Amanda or Patrick, like I do. Looking back on the early years of my relationship with my wife, Kelsey, I can see that one of the biggest mistakes I made was to shut down and pull away. It took me further away from where I wanted to be in my relationship with Kelsey. I was shutting down because I felt like I was the problem. I thought that she didn't like me. But having me pull away only confused Kelsey. She saw it as uncaring and cold. It left us both feeling disconnected. When we can begin to share with each other what's really going on within us, what our attachment longings are, and that we truly love each other, only then can we begin to understand that the fight cycle is the enemy, that we both care about each other, and we can begin to break this painful cycle and feel the connection that we want in our relationship. If you are ready to break your cycle, sign up for
All right.
a feeling of
Okay, so hopefully that kind of helped visualize how you move through the cycle, how that works. Now we're going to kind of talk about the tango and the steps and stages. So if you think about the steps and stages, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, see, sneak peek. That's the totality of therapy. So this staircase we're looking at here, or this kind of winding staircase, that's the totality of therapy from when they call to set up an appointment to when they are graduating from therapy. And then the tango is what happens in every session, or should be happening in every session. You're just tangoing all the way down the steps. You're just tangoing down the steps. Tango doesn't stand for anything. It's just, I don't know why she named it the tango. Well, I do. There's a story behind it. I can tell you some other time, but she liked to tango and it made her think of couples therapy, how relationships are a dance. So essentially there you go. But anyway, the tango is what happens in each session, and the steps and stages are the overall treatment plan. So the steps and stages, this slide, it gives you the big picture of EFT. And I want to say this up front, you do not need to memorize every step right now. What's most important is the understanding of the flow of this model. And so EFT is organized into three main stages. Stage one is de-escalation. This is where you're going to spend most of your time with couples. This is where we start. And our goals here are to build the alliance, understand the couple, and most importantly, identify and de-escalate the negative cycle. But it takes some time and patience to help that couple de-escalate the negative cycle. So we assess the relationship, we identify the cycle and attachment issues, and we begin, accessing underlying emotions. The reframe, we reframe the problem as the cycle, not each other. And this stage is all about helping the couple feel, like, oh, this makes sense. We're stuck in a pattern. And we have control and we can start and stop the pattern at any point in the process. All right, so stage two is restructuring the bond. This is where some deeper work happens. And here we help partners access their vulnerabilities, their fears, their needs, their attachment longings. And then we help the other person respond in a new way. And ultimately, we create new interactions where partners can reach for the other and respond emotionally. This is where bonding moments happen. And this is where you'll often see really powerful emotional shifts in session. And then stage three is consolidation. It's really kind of tying a bow on everything. This is all about locking in the change. We help couples develop new solutions to old problems. We reinforce new patterns of interaction and we solidify a sense of secure attachment. So they're not just having good sessions, they're actually living differently outside of the room. So if you just zoom out, EFT is really a journey from chaos and reactivity to understanding and emotional safety, understanding themselves and understanding each other, and then having that emotional safety and connection and security. So, again, you don't have to hold every step in your head. If you can remember, find the cycle, soften the emotions, create new connection, you're already thinking like an EFT therapist. So next we're getting into the heart of what we actually do in EFT, the interventions and skills. And this is often referred at, as the EFT tango. And I love this metaphor because it captures something really important that EFT is not a rigid step-by-step technique. It's a dance. It's fluid, responsive, and relational, kind of like I said earlier. Sue Johnson likes to tango and that's how she conceptualized this model that she created was like it is a fluid dance. And so at the center of it, there's five basic moves of EFT, and you don't need to memorize them perfectly, but you do want to understand how they flow together. So move one, they call this mirroring and reflecting, but I call it zoom out. This is how Terry, she's been supervising me in my couples work. You zoom out. This is where we start. We track what's happening in the present moment and we reflect it back. So when that happens and you start to feel really alone, what do you tend to want to do with that, right? This is where helping the clients to slow down and see their experiences more clearly. So we're saying, you do this, you do that, and that makes you feel this way, and then you tend to want to do this, and that hits you in a way that makes you feel X, Y, and Z, and you start to feel, like you want to withdraw or pursue whatever it is. You're zoomed out. You're looking at their overall negative cycle. Then move two is affect assembly and deepening. So we call this zoom in. You've zoomed out, now you're zooming in. Typically, whoever's emotion comes alive first in the session, we go deeper. We help clients connect to their emotions more fully, not just what they think, but what they feel in their body. We're unpacking things like the trigger, the perception, the emotional response, and the meaning they make about that emotional response. This kind of sounds very CBT, right? But this is what we're doing. This is where you move from I'm just annoyed to I actually feel hurt and maybe not very important to you. You see how that's a little bit softer, other than I'm just annoyed, I'm pissed, whatever, to no, I'm hurt and I feel like I'm not important. Okay, so move three is choreographing an engaged encounter. This is where we pass it to the partner. So you've zoomed out, you zoomed in on one. Now you help them share those softer, more vulnerable feelings with their partner. Okay, so that's the pass. That's the engaged encounter. So then you just say, well, now turn to your partner and tell them about the sadness that you're feeling or tell them that about that hurt. You're wanting to load them with that vulnerable emotion so that that's what they actually share and they don't just share like, oh, I'm still pissed at you. No, 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 that's not what you just said to me. Tell them about the hurt and the feeling of feeling unimportant. Tell them that because that's easier to have empathy for than someone coming at you all mad, right? Sometimes when you're first starting, though, you do have to pass the anger. that has to be validated to by their partner. So anyway, there's the passing, the engaged encounter, the passing of it. This is where the magic starts to happen between partners. We help them turn and share something vulnerable. Can you tell them what happens inside you when you feel alone? Now we're creating a new interaction, not just inside, a new interaction in the room. And then step four is processing the encounter, right? We're just processing. What was that like to tell? What was that like to hear? So after that moment, we slow it down and process it. What was that like for you? This helps deepen the emotional impact and build connection. And then finally, step five is integrating and validating. We call this just you summarizing, you're tying a bow on it. Finally, we're helping make sense of the experience. We're validating both partners and integrate what just happened into their understanding of the relationship. So it's like, oh, you were able to send that clear emotional signal. You were able to receive it and comfort it, and you felt so good when they held your hand and comforted that, and look, well, you got a different response, and it was less anger, and it's getting more of what you want, and you're connected. Whatever they did in session, you're just summarizing it, and you're tying a bow. You're praising. You're building them up. You're letting them know like they did this. They did this work right here in the room, and it's really, really exciting. It's magical to see. So the EFT Tango is really about slowing things down, deepening emotion, and creating new connection in that moment. And I also love this note on the slide, like the second figure in the dance. It can be different depending on the context. It could be the partner in couples therapy, of course, that's what we're talking about, but it could be a part of yourself in individual therapy. I do parts work sometimes with my individuals, or even an imagined other. Maybe someone from their childhood, maybe a bully that experience still triggers them, and you can work through that. It could be a spiritual. It could be it could be something spiritual. It could be God. It could be Jesus. It could be whatever. Um, so that second figure, I really love that because there's so much you can do with EFT. So again, this is not just about doing EFT perfectly. It's about learning how to stay present, follow emotion, and guide connection. All right, so that's kind of the things we do in EFT. Now, our last goal here is just training and resources. If this is something you're interested in, this is really the extent of the training you're going to get in this program. I mean, it's a fire hose. I told y'all that in the beginning. A 60-hour program, you're not going to learn everything there is to know about everything you want to do as a counselor. This is to introduce you, to pique your interest, and then you have to go out and get these more intense trainings. So, I'm going to tell you about the intense training if you're interested in EFT. You go through the International Center for Excellence in EFT. It's called ICEFT. Here's a link to the website here, and I've posted these slides on Blackboard, so you've got access to this. But it's just ICEEFT.com. If you're interested, the training's available through them. There are structured pathways towards training and certification. These are the different steps to certification or training. You've got your couples. Now, I've done all this. I've done the EFCT externship. It's 24 hours. It's a 3-day workshop. You go a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I can't remember how they structured it, but I went to one in Nashville. Um, I can't remember the trainer's name. It was Terry something. I remember Terry because the lady I work with here is Terry, the lady you're going to meet. Anyway, so there's an externship. Then there's an EFCT core skills, part one and part two. And so that's 2 long weekends. And I did both of those in Fayetteville, Arkansas with Ryan Reyna. And he has a podcast that's really good that I listen to when I know I have a difficult couple coming up. I'll just listen to one of his episodes and it kind of gets me in the right headspace. He was an amazing trainer, very knowledgeable and just very nice. And so you kind of have 3 big trainings, and then you go through supervision, which I do. Terry Wright is my supervisor, and then the application and package and to serve. I just haven't done all that yet. It costs a lot of money, and I just haven't done that yet. Maybe in the future, but right now I've got all the training I need, and I've got all the supervisory support that I need, and I have a part of a consultation group in a small group practice at Right Group Counseling. So if you can get in a situation like that, it's golden. It's amazing. So anyway, that's the how you get trained and certified in couples therapy. And then, of course, it's going to look very similar. You kind of have to do the basic trainings and then you add on EFIT or the EFFT, the family therapy. And so that's something I would like to continue my training in as well. I haven't got there yet. I've done a little bit of EFIT and then talked with, done some of that work in supervision. But the formal training I've not yet to do. I would love to. So, Anyway, you do all that through ICEFT, and they have in person and they have online Zoom trainings as well. So, and then I wanted you to have some resources. These are some really good books for EFT resources. ATIP, Attachment Theory and Practice. I've read that one. That one's really good because it talks a little bit about everything, attachment in couples, individual, and family therapy. So I would say start with that one. It's pretty dry. It's kind of hard to get through the first few chapters, especially since you kind of know a lot of it. But keep going, it gets better. And then the this one on the bottom left, Becoming an Emotionally Focused Therapist. I've kind of dabbled in that workbook a little bit too, and it's pretty good. But you see, she's got a lot of stuff. She's got an EFIT book. She's got one for trauma survivors. She's got, what is this? The practice. What is that? Trying to read the one on the top left besides ATIP. But anyway, she's got several books with she's even got with African American couples, one specific for that. Emotionally focused. Yeah, she's got all these, but I would say start with ATIP, that purple book right up there. All right, extra resources. The Leading Edge. This is who I had with Dr. Ryan Reyna and James Hawkins. I had Dr. Ryan Reyna was the leader of the training. He was really cool. James Hawkins, he was actually the guy who watched my tape. You have to show tape in the second portion of the core training, and it's not scary because these people are so nice and supportive, and I got a lot of good feedback. So I showed my tape, and James Hawkins was the one who watched it and gave me the feedback, and he was really great. So I would suggest the Leading Edge to anybody who's interested in EFT. Then there's a EFT and Sex podcast. I haven't listened to much of this. They also have a book about sex therapy, and they have a specific training for it. So that's another thing that you could look into because, of course, couples are going to talk about sex. And then you've got Success and Vulnerability. It's an online experiential training, and that might actually be through Ryan Reyna too, another training that he has. But I would say these extra resources are really good. This is where I would start. And then there's the We Heart Therapy, and they talk about EFT that here at the bottom with Dr. Bell. I y'all were assigned. You should listen to the very first episode. It's only about 20 minutes long, but it's an interview with Dr. Sue Johnson, and it's really good. So those are some extra resources there. And then, just in closing, before I get to your to-dos and reminders, just to wrap up, EFT gives you a clear, compassionate, and research-based way to understand relationships. So at its core, it helps people feel safe, seen, and connected. And what are we doing if we're not doing that, right? So I love this model. I hope you enjoyed it too. Your reminders and to-dos, read chapter 9 and listen to that We Heart Therapy podcast, episode 1 for your in-person class coming up. Be prepared with two potential questions for Terry Wright. And then finishing up at the end of Attached. That's going to be what we're going to do. We've got 2 more chapters on that. And then your group presentations are also coming up. So I have these dates. These work for this year, but next year the dates may be different, and I'm going to use this recording next year as well too. So just be ready for those things coming up. Just pay attention to your syllabus and the dates on the due dates. All right, so that's all I have for EFT, and I appreciate you listening. I know this one was a little bit longer, but this one's just my passion. So we'll see you in class.